I am Basia Jones and I'm 21. I'm currently in North Wales, but I have been living in South East London for a couple of years because I go to Goldsmiths University. Um, I do anthropology and visual practice. I like filmmaking and a bit of photography. Um, don't really know what else to say. Yeah, like that's kind of like a little summary of me.
How have you been affected by mental health?
So yeah, there's been a few different things that have happened. So like some events that have taken place that have affected my mental health. Like I've had my own kind of bouts with anxiety and depression, and a very close family member suffers quite a lot with mental health issues. So I've kind of seen that firsthand and how to kind of grow up in that environment. But I think the biggest factor, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit, is how grief and death kind of affected my well-being and mental health. And I think that you can't really experience grief or death of someone very close or someone that you cared about without pain and suffering, and without kind of questioning everything. And that kind of like level of questioning and confusion's always gonna bring up some kind of really difficult emotions. When I was 10, my stepdad, he committed suicide. So, and he lived in the same house as us, and he's my little brother's dad. That was really, really difficult because that was kind of like we didn't really talk about it. That was like a massive taboo for our family until I was about 18, because it was such a massive shock to everyone, and no one knew how to deal with it. And this is kind of like, so I was 10, so it's like 11 years ago. And I think that since then there's been massive amounts of conversation around toxic masculinity and like boys' mental health awareness and things like that. But like at that time, it was just, you had no idea. Like you had no idea that he was going to do that. Like he seemed like a very kind of, it just didn't seem like it was going to happen. So it was a massive shock for the system, and I was very, very young. But like I said, we didn't talk about it. And then when I was 15, my dad died from skin cancer because he got sick and he had cancer for a couple of years. So that was like a completely another process of grief, because this time round, my dad had actually been sick, and it was very serious, but I still didn't kind of think it was going to happen. So again, it was a massive shock. And then 11 months later, my grandma died. But I think a lot of people know what it's like to kind of like lose a grandparent. The only difference was for me that it was like in such a close time to my dad. So it was like another kind of rock figure in my life that, as you know, she was like always there for me through everything that happened when I was younger. Like she would go and pick me up. Like I'd run away to your house and then she'd pick me up from your house. So I'd be like, I'd just go for like a few days, and she was always just my absolute sanctuary. So that was really difficult, but it's a much more accepting kind of grief. I think the big thing that should be brought to light is the taboo of death, because that for me is like what made me kind of suffer and what made the shock go really internal, and my inability to speak about it. Even to my really close friends like you, I don't think that we had conversations about my stepdad. Like, I think a lot of people that we went to school with would say the same thing. Like, I think a few people might have known, but like I never, ever, ever spoke about my stepdad. My dad, we all knew about, like you were with me the whole time kind of thing. But we were still so young that it's such a difficult, like it's a really difficult thing to talk to friends about, and I understand all that. But yeah, I think it's just a distinction of losing someone to suicide is completely different to losing someone who was ill. But yeah, I think it's the taboo. It's the taboo of, especially of suicide. I don't see how we can heal if we don't talk about it. But people think that there's somehow, this is just from my personal experience and my family and stuff, I think that you kind of think that you're keeping strength if you're not talking about it, when in reality, like, you're just making yourself more and more sick. Yeah. And I think with mental health as well, just as a side note, we all get sick from time to time. Like every single person gets sick from time to time. And it's the same with your mental health. Like you are undoubtedly going to get sick at some point in your life. And like, I think the grief just is like a kind of like massive wave of like everything of depression and anxiety and really, really questioning everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and like what do you wish you were told earlier than about all of like about grief and its effects?
So, like I said, the big thing is the taboo. We don't talk about it, especially in the West. We have this massive kind of stereotypically fear of death. You know, that's like, I'm not going to go into it, but like the stems of kind of religion and things like that, apart from like, we won't go into it, but like a lot of it, you know, heaven and hell, like you want to know where you're going after death. And if we could talk about that and have more of a kind of dialogue and a narrative when you're young, as they do in a lot of parts of the world, by the way, that without life, like without death, you can't have life. It's just a complete circle. And if we can have more conversations like that when we're younger, then a lot less people would spend years grieving, questioning everything. Why does it have to be like this? What's the point of being here? What happens afterwards? Why me? All these different things. You would save a lot of kind of draining energy that you're probably never going to find the answers to. It's a lifelong mission, these questions. If we understood, if we accepted that we're going to lose the people that we love, and that's not to sound really grim, but like I said, it's a part of life. And I think Japan's got a much healthier, I don't know if you've had any conversations with people, but a much healthier kind of attitude towards death, because they have like a saying, and I can't remember it, so I'm not going to embarrass myself, but basically it means that there is no separation between life and death. Another thing I think that I would have been like to have told when I was younger, this is from my, again, personal experience, is the truth. Because I think, like, you know, I had a lot of responsibilities in my life when I was younger. And, like, a lot of really, like, adulty responsibilities put onto me when I was very small. And it was really, really strange that the adults around me decided that suddenly when people died, I wasn't allowed to know the truth. And like, I'd already seen so much and like been through so much. And it was just really, really weird. And it was really like, it made me really angry. And that's completely a part of grief and stuff. But like, both times I was angry to begin with because of the same reason. So the first time with my stepdad, like, I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. And this is completely obviously up to parents and stuff and how far they want their children to see things. But like, for me, it was just taking away from the fact that I wasn't allowed to grieve properly. You know, everyone else went to this funeral, they grieved. They were allowed to, you know, really have that process of being with their family and mourning, etc., etc. And I was really hurt by that I wasn't allowed to. So then for 8 years, like, not only did my family not speak about it, I didn't speak about it, and it caused me a lot of anxiety. And when I finally did open up at 18, it was like a whirlwind of emotions. You know, it took me like a few years to not feel sick or choked up, like physically sick from talking about what had happened. And now, like, it's absolutely fine, I can talk about it, but it took me a few years. So I know if I would have been more, you know, if I would have been a bigger part of like the mourning process with the adults, it would have been better for me. The second time with my dad, same thing, kind of, in the sense that no one was telling me the truth. I was 15 this time, and you know, I was being kind of like taken out of the conversation. Suddenly everything was tailored around how the people spoke to me. It was kind of like tailored into how to not make me upset. So then it gave me like a kind of fantasy view of, you know, my dad's really, really, really sick. He's dying from cancer, and like, I've seen him and stuff, but like, in my head, he's going to get better. Like, he's going to get better because everyone's telling me he's going to get better. And I think that's really dangerous. I don't think that you should give anyone false hope. I mean, like, I don't think that you should be like really negative, and I don't think that you should be like, you know, this person's going to die. But I do think that just because it's a younger person, you shouldn't oppress their rights to know the truths of what's going on in a situation, because it makes it a lot harder. And again, I was shocked for a long time after that, you know, really, really shocked. And just while I'm on this tangent, I think another thing is the process of grief. People tell you, you know, there's like this kind of assumption among people, among society and stuff, that, you know, you're going to be quite depressed and you're going to cry for like 6 months, a year, whatever. And like a lot of us know the stages of grief, you know, there's like, you know, upset, crying, depression, anger, denial. Can't think of this right now. But yeah, basically, my point is that people expect you to be really upset. And then, you know, all these other things. But the reality is, for a lot of people, that's not how it works. It's not linear. You know, you might be angry first, you might be confused first, you might be in shock first. For me personally, like, I was in shock for about a year after my dad, and then I started crying, then I started getting depressed, and then I was angry, and then I was angry again, then I was confused some more, then I was like depressed again, and now like I seem to have kind of bounced out quite a lot. But what people don't tell you is, like, it's really, really, really not linear. Like, it's just not. And every single person's experience is completely different. So we should give our friends time to speak, you know, ask them really what they need. If they want to be on their own, fair enough. Like, if they want to speak about a certain experience that they had or a memory that they had, you should really let them. You should really let them have that moment, because otherwise it's very, very easy to suppress and try not to be a Debbie Downer kind of thing, and like try not to talk about your emotions and stuff. But in reality, like, people need to express in order to heal.
So what advice would you give someone going through grief right now? What kind of help can they access, or what might help them, you know, currently?
Well, like I said, I think that every single person's grieving process is like completely different, and every single loss is completely different. There's no, you know, two stories that are the same. But I think for anyone that has experienced suicide when they're young, or at any point really, I think that it's vital to kind of like have some therapy or counseling around that. But you should really get someone, and for any kind of loss. But I think with therapists, like you spoke about and stuff, like, you maybe didn't have the right therapist for what you needed. And it was the same with me. When I was younger, I had counselors, and then when I was 18, I had a counselor again, and it wasn't quite right for me, because there's a lot of going back to the past. And like, I think this is the thing with the suicide, I think that was important because I needed to relive it. But then at different moments, and with my dad and stuff, like, it wasn't so much about going back to the past. It was about how I could deal with my emotions right here and right now. So finding the right therapist is like super, super important. You know, maybe someone who specializes in suicide, maybe someone who specializes in grief, someone who specializes in trauma, if it was particularly traumatic. Someone who specializes in spirituality and mindfulness. Right now, I've got a amazing counselor, therapist really, and he is kind of got more like CBT approaches. So it's very kind of like, what is the issue? What can we do about it in the present? We don't really go into the past, and that's very helpful for me right now, because I'm at a completely different stage in my life where I've kind of accepted the things that happened, and I'm just trying to deal with the repercussions now of like my personal emotional trauma and things like that. So for me personally right now, like, the mindfulness is one is amazing. But when I was really in the first moments of grief, I think the advice that I have for people is, know that as hard as it is to think that you're not going to feel like this forever, I promise you, you're not going to feel like this forever. Grief is like, it's all encompassing when it first happens, completely all encompassing. Like, it is every single part of your life. You can't escape it. You go to shops, like, you feel like shit. Like, you go to see your friends, you feel like shit, you constantly feel like shit because you're constantly thinking about that person, that thing that happened. Like, how can everyone be going around living their lives like nothing ever happened when your whole life has been torn apart? So know that that's going to get easier. That part of it is going to get easier because your grief is going to kind of like get a bit smaller in the sense that it's easier to manage. So you'll still cry, you'll still feel like shit, but it'll be certain times, it'll be certain events, it'll be certain triggers, it'll be certain days that make you feel emotional, as opposed to constantly. Know that that is going to happen. Like, it is going to get more manageable. And also, I think my advice is, like, as painful it is, I think when you start seeing beauty and having joyful moments again, there's going to be like an added layer of that beauty. There's going to be an added layer of that joy, because you're going to be suddenly, you're just going to see life in a completely different way. And I don't think that's like necessarily the worst aspect of losing someone. I think that unfortunately it can teach you a lot of things, and unfortunately it can teach you a lot of gratitude in the worst possible way. We're gonna have to pause it. We're gonna have to edit it. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Come on. Shh, I've just dropped my coffee. And when you do have joyful moments, and you will have joyful moments, you will feel happiness, and you will feel like warmth and laughter. And you know, for me personally, like, I didn't understand how something could happen again. I didn't understand why me again, like all the shit that's already happened in my life. Why is everyone suddenly dropping off? Like, it's not fair at all. I need these people in my life. I didn't understand how I was going to live really without, especially my grandma, after everything that happened. But you know, I went to festivals with my friends. I went to parties. I had a good time. I felt joy. I went to concerts. I saw music live. Like, I had beautiful moments of crying with joy. Like, you do feel happiness again, and you will feel whole. But my advice is to understand yourself, and to not question why, because like I said before, that is an absolute lifelong mission answer, and you're probably not gonna find it. You know, monks don't even have the answer. But I think really understanding yourself, understanding what you need, telling people what you need, like really telling them, say like, I need to just speak to someone right now. I just need you to just sit there and be quiet right now. Like, I just need you in some kind of way right now. And like, your friends and family, they'll support you if they know how. And it's so much labor going through so much and going through grief and having to tell people like how to behave as well. But it makes it easier for you. And if you can just put your pride aside and tell people you're hurting, you know, people have hearts, and people have empathy. They just, unfortunately, when it comes to death, like, our society kind of teaches us to shun away from the subject and kind of leave the person grieving, and, you know, don't question them about that. The majority of people want to talk about it. It's like, it's, you know, you want to talk about who you're sleeping with, you want to talk about like what you did on the weekend. Someone's just gone from your life, just gone, just taken away. Your heart is broken. Of course you want to speak about it. So speak to people, and, you know, give them the space and time and whatever they need. Yeah, just
Yeah.
have like have more of a dialogue. But, and this is, I'm saying this all with a pinch of salt, because I didn't do it when I was younger. Like, even with you guys, even in school and stuff, like, I remember so many times being so pissed off with all of you, and like, it's not any of yours fault. Like, it really isn't. We weren't doing anything wrong. Like, we were all just living our lives. But I think being so young, like, people really don't know how to handle it. I think so. If you're young, seek out adults. If you're finding it difficult with your friends, seek out adults, because there's loads of them, and like, nearly all of them have lost someone, and they really know how it is. So yeah, just know that you will feel joy again.
Yeah, and I reckon like it would be good to have more conversations in school about like the realities of grief, because even for us as your friends, like obviously, yeah, like you said, we didn't know what to say and do, and we're probably imitating the teachers who didn't really know what to say or do either, like with these false promises and hopes, and feeling awkward around death and grief. So I think that it would be helpful to have like more honest conversations for both people who are going to lose someone and going to be trying to look out for someone who's lost someone.
Yeah, I think just making sure that that person's going to have the care that they need afterwards. If you know someone that's their parent or whatever is dying, or any kind of family member, I think just like if it's in a school situation, knowing that that person's going to have some form of like therapy or counseling or something that they need is very, very important. One thing that I do want to say though, like I didn't have what my brother had. My brother had like this group that they could go and speak about like in a kind of creative way. And this is something that we talked about the other day. Like I think that as a point of moving forward, like within schools and education, around conversations around death and losing people, children aren't going to speak like we're speaking. Like they're not going to understand the kind of like different aspects and how to heal themselves. They're just not going to understand that. Again, after crying for me to open the door, and then came back in, cried a second, and then went, I honestly don't understand this dog. She's a Leo, so everything has to be around her. Sorry, Leos.
Sorry to all the Leos out there.
Sorry to all the Leos. I'm joking, you guys are great. Okay, for me personally, I had a lot of regrets when these people went. A lot of regrets. I had a lot of regrets that the things I didn't tell them, the things that I didn't sort out. And I think that with spouses, when they lose their other half, their partners and stuff, a lot of people don't talk about things like how they're going to parent on their own, how the other person wants them to parent, what they're going to kind of like their future and stuff. And like it's really, really difficult planning for things that you don't expect and you can't fathom happening. But I think if people and like general society can just start having like conversations with their other halves, with their parents, like putting things into place, because once you have them really, really difficult conversations and kind of plans, it makes it so much easier and there's no regret afterwards, and you just don't know what's going to happen in life. And then with children, like I said, yeah, just kind of like allowing your children to express themselves and really kind of pushing for that, because everyone's creative and like all children are creative. We just kind of suppress it as we get older, and as we come into adolescence we start like being interested in other things and thinking I'm not that sort of person, like I don't write poetry, whatever. You probably could do something creative that kind of express yourself. And yeah, I think that would be my biggest advice, just from what I've personally seen with my family, with me, with my younger siblings. I've seen what's helpful, I've seen what isn't. Something that isn't helpful is pretending that it didn't happen, because you can feel that pain, you can feel that passive aggression, you can feel that seep into every single aspect of your life. And if you don't start having them difficult conversations that really make you choke up, like it's horrible, then there's just no way you can move forward. And with grief, you can move forward, and like it might be with you constantly, but you can move forward and carry on living and growing. I think, like, in summary, have those difficult conversations, like put yourself outside of your comfort zone, sit down with your family, sit down with your brother, sit down with your sister, whatever, and speak about what happened. If you haven't lost anyone, then speak about what you'd do if something unimaginable did happen. That's really like difficult to hear, and it might sound really like shut up, but honestly, when you're on the other side of that, and when there's no plans in place, and when no one knows what's going on, it can tear families apart. It can tear families apart, like financially, emotionally. You know, people start arguing, like it's not good. And I think a massive thing is, as well, because the two people for me that were the biggest shocks and most impact were the two father figures of my life. And I think that correlates a lot to kind of toxic masculinity and keeping things in. Like, as much as my dad died from a natural disease, he didn't really speak as well, and I know might not have anything to do with it, but I'm not going to go too deep into it. But yeah, like, speak to your sons and your brothers about their feelings, and find ways to express creatively, because it is so healing. It is so healing. And another massive kind of thing that I always advocate and is kind of tapping into mindfulness and tapping into connection, tapping into like a higher consciousness. And you can do that. And like, as much as people think, oh no, meditation's not for me, I've tried it, there are other ways, and you can understand yourself on a much deeper level. If we could all do that, not only society would be much better in so many different ways, but we'd have so much acceptance to the most painful things in life, and we'd have better kind of coping mechanisms and tools. I think the big things, the tools, like if someone has lost someone recently, is finding a good therapist, telling your friends what you need, telling your family what you need, having those difficult conversations, and just allowing yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. And don't judge yourself at all if you're not crying. Don't judge yourself if you're just angry. Don't judge yourself if you're in denial. It is all a process, and it is going to get easier. And you will come out of it with a completely different view on life, but that's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. You're just going to hold the people that you love closer to yourself, and you're going to see beauty around you, and like how amazing life is to be living, and the gratitude, the ultimate gratitude. I think that's my kind of summary, because I'm trying to make it as like kind of the silver linings and positivity as much as possible. Like, within such a difficult subject, there is a lot of light to be found. And I don't say that lightly either. Like, I've really felt the darkness of losing people, and then having to deal with the after effects of it. But I've also found so much light, and I found so much kind of peace that, you know, I'm here on this earth to live, and I'm here to give my full potential and express. And that's what we should all be doing.
Well, thanks for doing just that. This last half an hour, it's been really moving. And I know we talk about these kind of things, but hearing someone in such like depth talk about their experiences and their advice has been really powerful. So thank you so much, Bash, for talking with us.
Thank you, Mairead.
Thanks for having you on the show, darling.
Thanks so much. See you soon. Speak to you soon.